Beliefs have a pattern. My recently issued book, The Astrology of Beliefs, will take astrology where it mostly hasn't been before, and you with it. It should make the subject more credible and understandable if you belong with the skeptics, and more interesting if you're already convinced. Overall, it will become apparent that in some respect astrology is religion's last, or at least next frontier, a point I'll come to briefly in a moment, as I realize that that's a big claim, because especially among Christians there can be an insistence that astrology is either a forbidden divination or a contemptible superstition. Those are positions that must be confronted head-on, because they amount to a terrible distortion of the facts and make for a waste of a useful information resource. Quite simply, the Astrology of Beliefs, it's available on Amazon now, is about how and why you believe as you do. Although obviously we have free will in such matters as whether we believe at all in such as God or immortality, the soul, how we believe or disbelieve, and a lot of other things are considerably determined and predictable. It's often said that with 12 zodiac signs and more than 12 people in the world, a sun sign can hardly hope to be true. And undeniably, every astrologer would tell you that for certain details and apparent exceptions, you must read the birth chart beyond the sun sign. An example would be the late singer Amy Winehouse, whose chronic drug and alcohol addictions don't resonate with much that's associated with her sign Virgo, but which is more comprehensible in light of an afflicted Neptune pattern so frequent in cases of addiction. This much conceded, it will be found that beliefs are a clearer, more reliable guide than the character traits associated with sun signs. Or let's say they are themselves the clearest, most consistent character traits of all, because all character is formed around various complexes and archetypes which the signs own and impose. For example, there's not much doubt Aries is basically evangelical, whether as a committed believer or an atheist. On the believing side, take General Booth of the Salvation Army. Aries is the military sign. Valiant Jew-defending Corrie ten Boom in World War II Holland. And outspoken televangelist Pat Robinson in America. And then on the other side, take Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens and Daniel Dennett, vocal advocates of neo-atheism. And then their anti-godmother, Madeleine O'Hare, who famously campaigned against religion in schools and who said she liked a good fight so God would do her best. This doesn't mean there are no evangelical Christians or radical atheists in other signs, but the style and bias is distinctive in Aries and to be found in many other examples than those just given. Then, in the next sign, Taurus, a feminine or predominantly introverted rather than masculine and extroverted sign, the tune changes. It changes radically to something quieter, a good deal more interiorized and philosophical. Indeed, Taurus is almost the sign of the philosophers, starting with, there is some evidence to believe, Socrates in the West and Buddha in the East, and running right through to Kant and Wittgenstein. Wittgenstein was incidentally born in Austria and on the same day as Hitler. So they weren't similar? Well, they weren't time twins, but the closeness of their charts is the kind of thing that had St. Augustine dismissing astrology for Christians and for everyone. He only needed to observe a child born to wealth and poverty at the same hour to know astrology was lies. But this is jumping to conclusions. Wittgenstein was born to extreme wealth and Hitler to nothing like it, though he obtained it later. However, let's note that Wittgenstein, due to his background, got away with almost certainly precipitating the death of an unfortunate tuberculous student whom he bashed in one of his obscene, uncontrollable Hitler-style rages. But this touches on an objection, not least the religious objection to all astrology, namely that it's about fate. Whereas, by contrast, God is supposed to have given us free will and grace. Yet even the ancients who evolved the study of astrology mostly believed we know our fate in order to negotiate it. The stars incline, they do not compel, as the old saying goes. If we can know we have individual danger patterns, like Amy Winehouse indicating addiction, or Wittgenstein indicating violence, though we will probably always be a bit addicted to something, or rather aggressive, we can hopefully make sure we're hooked on sweets or challenging sports, rather than the worst possible manifestations of our weaknesses. Also, if we have unfortunate patterns, and people do show more unfortunate than fortunate patterns, in which it's likely people could prove hurtful or unhelpful and so on, we can cultivate philosophical and spiritual attitudes rather than merely depressed feelings resulting from unrealistic expectations about our chances. The fact that Magi, astrologers, came to Christ's birth means something, as does the fact that the Essenes looked for the Messiah in the stars and the rabbis of the Talmud discussed astrology. Christians especially are not intended to dismiss and to disregard astrology as they have been doing since the early church fathers, like the ridiculous, self-mutilating Origen, said that the Magi were devil worshippers converted to Christ, or Bishop Chrysostom of Constantinople, who said astrology was so evil it would be better if the Magi had never come to Christ's birth. Of course, there's a lot of bad and misused astrology, as there's a lot of bad and misleading interpretation of the Bible too. We won't stop studying the Bible for that reason, nor should we stop detecting those messages the heavens are meant to supply us. Astrology is not divination, but rather the study of regular cycles, and thus how similar things happen, and people and characteristics emerge under phases of those cycles. God rules the world through especially time, so time is to be studied. And the Jewish calendar is itself an adjustment to the major cycles. Its religious new year, its calendar being solilunar, begins on the first new moon following the sun's entry into Aries, which begins the zodiacal year. There is a time for everything under the sun is a celebrated passage of Ecclesiastes, often associated with astrology and its philosophy. Astrology is not specifically mentioned, but it's absolutely implied. There are, after all, 28 times for things to do, according to Ecclesiastes, and there happen to be 28 days to a lunar cycle, and its lunar cycles govern the Jewish calendar. They also help astrologers, within reason, to predict, not by looking at the night sky and uttering on impulse, or perhaps under the influence of spirits. That was a form of ancient omen astrology, and the prophets do condemn that. It is a form of divination like tea leaf reading, but this must be distinguished from seriously studying cycles, something which only began after the last books of the Old Testament were written. These do map events, and events are, within bounds, predictable, because we are substantially fated. Psalm 139 maintains that God foreknows every day of our lives, and any astrologer will tell you it is the moon that is timer and or trigger to events on the more daily basis, and which manifest in harmony with the signs and larger than lunar cycles of planets as their build-up and interactions affect personal and national birth patterns. But let's not get too technical, there's no need. The value of the Astrology of Beliefs is it offers you an easy in to the astrological worldviews with its tie-ins to religion, which you really should know, not least those Christians who are in such denial about the entire subject. I cannot insist enough that biblical interpretation itself is often deficient because it does not employ the larger symbolic and psychological framework that astrology would supply it, along with an adequate understanding of the ages. Not to understand what the ages of Taurus, Aries, and Pisces and the soon-to-dawn Aquarian age signify is to lose much. The very similarities and dissimilarities, connections and disconnections between Old and New Testaments are far more readily grasped if one understands the era differences into which they speak, the imagery, concepts and psychology they employ. My books have by no means been all about astrology, though Testament of the Magi is about the data of Christ's birth and Christianity's destiny about the pattern of the first Pentecost, i.e. the chart for Christianity. But even in a recent work, like the extended essay Solomon's Tantric Song, Questions of Sexual Spirituality, which is about much debated mysteries and riddles of the Song of Solomon, I include a few unique, useful, even astonishing insights I could never have arrived at without recourse at one point to astrology. Again, my Temple Mysteries and Spiritual Efficiency, though its subject range is particularly wide, everything up to and including a rare review of Jung's The Red Book, in one chapter does, I feel, illuminate both the old creation-evolution argument and the way that prophecy works with unexpected perspectives from astrology, though I don't for one moment simplistically suggest the major prophets of the Bible were employing astrology rather than vision. The Christ of Revelation accuses the Laodicean church of being in effect beggars, wretched, pitiable, poor, blind and naked. All the time they regard themselves as rich and so well provided for that they need nothing whatsoever. There's a touch of this to my position vis-a-vis the churches on astrology. As I mentioned in another video, the response I once received from a religious journal was, "We know all there is to know about Jesus, we don't need to know about the Magi." But in fact, you very much do need to know. Your interpretations of the faith are sometimes half blind and crippled, if not denuded of truth, because you don't know this very useful, helpful accompaniment and sometimes interpreter of the faith. And in a world where people are increasingly individualized, your spiritual guidance itself could sometimes use astrological insights to modify the rough and ready generalizations that you throw out to people. Carl Jung meant it when towards the end of his life he said given another decade or so, he would dedicate it to astrological studies. He had found the system often better able to penetrate the mysteries of the psyche than some commonly used tricks of the psychiatric couch. There are truths here which just can't be overlooked. But if, as said, you want a few shortcuts to astrology, including to some ideas of leading philosophers and religionists, plus a few details about sex round the zodiac, because doesn't that always interact with religion and colour belief somewhat, I feel I can recommend the Astrology of Beliefs to you without too many qualms that you won't enjoy it and obtain something useful from it.